My wife hadn't cooked in months, but tonight she made spaghetti, her way of hiding the fact that she'd been seeing someone else. Too bad for her, I noticed. I knew something was up the moment she started making spaghetti. Rachel hadn't cooked a meal for us in months, ever since she discovered that you could get takeout from pretty much anywhere with a few taps on your phone. So there she was, humming in the kitchen like we were the picture-perfect suburban couple, as the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. I leaned back in my chair, beer in hand, watching her as if I were watching some offbeat detective show where the suspect clearly doesn't know they've been caught yet. She even wore that apron I bought her a year ago, the one with the tag still on it because she forgot about it. Sure, I thought. Real convenient that you remembered now. So what's the occasion? I asked, my tone casual, but my mind already in overdrive. Her hands froze for a second, like a criminal caught mid-act, but she recovered fast, too fast. No occasion, she chirped, almost too brightly, like a bad actress in a sitcom. Just thought we could have a nice dinner together. You know, like we used to. That smile of hers might have fooled me years ago. Hell, it might have even worked on a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. And I definitely wasn't buying whatever she was selling tonight. Maybe in some other version of my life, I would have just enjoyed the meal. I could have played the role of the grateful husband, smiled and nodded while thinking this was some big gesture. But I knew better. There was something behind this. Something way bigger than a half-assed dinner effort. About halfway through the meal, I decided it was time to start poking holes. You know, I began, twirling some spaghetti on my fork. I ran into James earlier. Said he saw you at that new cafe downtown the other day. Didn't know you were into artisanal coffee. Rachel froze again, this time mid-Parmesan sprinkle. There was a slight hitch in her breath, just enough for me to notice. Then she laughed. That same awkward high-pitched laugh she gave when she couldn't think of a good lie fast enough. Oh yeah. I met up with Cindy for a girls' day. You know, some shopping, some coffee. She waved it off like it was the most innocent thing in the world, but I wasn't buying it. Her voice was just a little too chirpy, like when a kid lies about flushing their vegetables down the toilet. Funny, I said, leaning back in my chair. Because James said he saw you there with some guy. Looked cozy, he said. And there it was, the slightest flicker of panic in her eyes, followed by a too-quick recovery. Oh, that must have been Rob. From work. She rushed through the words, like she had rehearsed them in her head but forgot her lines. Just a business meeting. You know how clients are. Right. Rob. Good ol' Rob, the guy from work who always managed to find himself a little too close to Rachel at every company gathering. The guy with a slick haircut and perfectly tailored suits, who thought he was God's gift to women. I'd seen him plenty of times, and I didn't like him then. I liked him even less now. But I didn't let on. I just nodded and kept eating, playing it cool. Ah, Rob, I muttered, my voice as indifferent as I could make it. He seems helpful. The rest of dinner passed in silence, her tension almost palpable as she poked at her plate, while I pretended to enjoy the meal. It wasn't bad, really. The sauce had too much oregano, but under the circumstances, I couldn't complain. It was still the best spaghetti she'd made in a long time. Probably because it was the only spaghetti she'd made in a long time. After dinner, she disappeared into the shower, probably hoping to wash away the stench of her guilt along with the smell of garlic. I sat on the couch, beer in hand, contemplating my next move. And then it hit me, her phone. Rachel had never been particularly secretive with her phone before. I'd had her passcode for years. Why wouldn't I? We trusted each other, right? So, I did what any rational, suspicious husband would do in this situation. I went through it. Now, before you start judging, let me clarify. This wasn't snooping. This was detective work, pure and simple. And trust me, I wasn't wrong. The messages weren't hard to find. A whole string of texts from Rob. Nothing overtly damning at first. Just your standard, can't wait to see you, and last night was fun kind of stuff. Innocent enough, if you squint hard and pretend Rob's your grandma. But then came the photos. Let's just say Rachel wasn't attending any business meetings in the kind of lingerie she was sending to Rob. Unless, of course, the new office dress code involved lace and strategically placed cutouts. I could have stormed into the bathroom right then and there, slammed her phone in her face, demanded answers. But I didn't. No, that would have been too easy. I wanted to watch her squirm. So instead, I forwarded all the messages and photos to her phone, from mine. I poured myself another beer and waited. A few minutes later, Rachel came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, looking all fresh and innocent, like she hadn't just spent the last few months making a fool of me. She picked up her phone from the coffee table, and when it buzzed, her face turned pale. She stammered something about needing to check an email, and practically sprinted to the bedroom. I followed her, leaned against the doorframe as I watched her frantically typing away on her phone, deleting messages and trying to cover her tracks. "Everything okay, babe?" I asked, my voice calm, detached. "You look a little stressed." She jumped, almost dropping her phone in her panic. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, her voice strained. "Just work stuff. Work stuff." I stepped closer, watching her like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "You sure it's not Rob's stuff?" Her face was priceless, guilt, panic, and a dash of horror. She opened her mouth to lie again, but I cut her off. This was too much fun to let her talk. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the photos, and held them up to her face. "Care to explain this?" I asked. "Or should I send them to Rob's wife myself?" Rachel's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as if she could spit out a half-decent excuse. But we were way past that now. She glanced at the photos on my phone, her eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights, mascara smudging just slightly from the shower steam. For a second, I thought she might try to deny it. You know, tell me I misunderstood, maybe even blame Rob. He was the persistent one, after all. That would have been something. But no, she just stood there, staring at the evidence, her mind probably running through damage control strategies. I could almost see her brain buffering, loading excuse after excuse, only to delete each one before it came out of her mouth. Instead, she went straight to the classic move, tears. Big, wet crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks, with the sniffles to match. "I'm sorry," she finally choked out, collapsing onto the bed like the weight of her betrayal had just hit her. "It was a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for it to happen. It didn't mean anything, I swear." They didn't mean anything, defense. Classic. Like that was supposed to make it better. I watched her for a moment, barely resisting the urge to roll my eyes. There's something almost surreal about watching your wife beg for forgiveness, especially when you're not even angry. Not anymore, anyway. I wasn't really mad at her, you know? Annoyed, sure. Disappointed, definitely. But mad? No. If anything, I was tired. Tired of playing the part of the oblivious husband while she played at being guilty. I'd suspected something for a while, long enough to stop caring about the marriage, or at least long enough to plan my exit strategy. But still, I let her squirm a little longer. It was, if nothing else, mildly entertaining. Rachel wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smudging her makeup even more. "I love you," she whispered, as if those 3 words could magically undo months of sneaking around. "It was stupid, okay? I was stupid. Please, let's just fix this. We can fix this, right? Fix this?" Now that was rich. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Fix this." I echoed, letting the words hang in the air like cigarette smoke. "You really think you can fix this with a few tears and an apology?" She sniffled, nodding frantically, like a student who hadn't done their homework but was still hoping for a passing grade. "Yes. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can talk more. I'll cut Rob off. I already have. It's over, I swear." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean it's over now that you've been caught?" She flinched at that. Good. At least she had the decency to look ashamed. "Yes, but nothing," I interrupted. "You didn't confess because you felt guilty. You got caught, Rachel. And the only reason you're sorry now is because you know what's coming." Her lips quivered as she opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't in the mood for more of her scripted remorse. I'd seen enough. I'd heard enough. And here's the thing, I wasn't some tragic victim in this whole mess. No, I'd known Rachel long enough to see this coming. Maybe not with Rob specifically, But the signs had been there for a while. The gradual distance, the excuses, the sudden interest in working late, when I knew damn well her job barely demanded 40 hours a week. It was only a matter of time before she slipped up. She just wasn't as clever as she thought she was. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I had already started making moves of my own. See, I wasn't just sitting around waiting to get cheated on like some clueless sitcom husband. I'd already started looking for an out. And I'd found one. Linda. Rachel's tears continued as I watched her crumble into some fragile version of the woman I once thought I loved. But the reality of it? I didn't care. Not anymore. She'd been checked out of our marriage long before Rob came into the picture, and if I'm being honest, so had I. I just didn't realize it until Linda came along. Linda and I met at work, and sure, it started innocently enough. Conversations over coffee, shared frustrations about our jobs. But then it became something more. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally? Yeah. That line had been crossed months ago. And I didn't feel guilty about it. Not even a little. So while Rachel was sneaking around with Rob, I was preparing to upgrade, as they say. A newer model, with better features. Linda laughed at my jokes. She listened. She didn't spend her time pretending to be someone she wasn't. And best of all, she wasn't trying to hide it. But Rachel didn't need to know all that. Not yet, anyway. So, I said finally, walking over to the bed where she sat, still wiping at her eyes. What do you think happens now? She looked up at me, hopeful, like she was waiting for some magic solution to pop out of my mouth. We work on it, she offered, her voice shaky. We go to therapy? We start over? We can fix this. Fix this. She really thought she could cry her way back into a clean slate. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I knelt down in front of her, keeping my voice calm, quiet. You know, Rachel, if you'd put even half the effort into our marriage that you did into sneaking around with Rob, maybe we wouldn't be here. Her bottom lip trembled as more tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't done. But here's the thing, I said, leaning in a little closer. I'm not mad. Really, I'm not. I paused, watching as her face shifted from guilt to confusion. Honestly, I'm relieved. Relieved. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. What do you mean, relieved? I smiled, standing up and grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. Relieved because this whole thing made me realize something. I took my time, letting her sit there in stunned silence. I've been seeing someone too. Her eyes widened. What? Well, not exactly seeing, I said, shrugging. Let's call it preparing to upgrade. Her name's Linda. We've been getting close. She's everything you're not. Funny, smart, actually interested in me, not just when it's convenient. Rachel stared at me, her face twisting from disbelief to shock, then finally to a kind of hollow defeat. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I walked toward the door, giving her one last look. I'll be staying with her for a bit. You might want to start figuring out what's next for you. Oh, and Rob? I wouldn't worry too much. Guys like him don't change, and I'm pretty sure his wife already knows. Have fun with that. And with that, I left, shutting the door behind me. Her sobs followed me down the hall, but I didn't care. The marriage had been over long before tonight. All that was left now was the paperwork. Rachel's sobs echoed down the hallway as I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face. It was strangely peaceful. You'd think walking out on your wife, knowing she's been screwing around behind your back, would feel a little more chaotic. But no. This was calm, almost serene. Like I just crossed the finish line of some terrible marathon I hadn't wanted to run in the first place. I sat in the car for a moment, letting it all settle in. The sounds of the night outside were muted by the car doors, a quiet hum in the background. I stared at the dashboard, wondering if I should feel more. Anger? Grief? Regret? But all I felt was the relief I had mentioned earlier. Rachel had cried her tears, delivered her apologies, but they didn't land. I wasn't stupid. I knew that once the shock wore off, she'd be blaming me for this whole mess. She'd find a way to twist it around, make it about how I hadn't been there, how I had been distant. Not that any of that mattered now. I wasn't going to Linda's place tonight. Not yet. There were still a few loose ends I needed to tie up before I could move on from this whole train wreck. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There it was, Rob's wife. I had been holding on to her number for a while now, after seeing her at one of those corporate Christmas parties where spouses pretend to care about each other's jobs. We'd only spoken briefly that night, enough for me to see that she wasn't clueless. No, Rob's wife was sharper than he probably gave her credit for. And I had a feeling she'd want to know what her dear husband had been up to with mine. I stared at her name for a long minute. I could send the texts, the photos, blow this whole thing wide open, just like that. But then what? I'd be dragging someone else into this mess, maybe blowing up her life the way mine had already imploded. Did I really want to be that guy? In the end, I put my phone back in my pocket without sending anything. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. There was something about it that felt too cheap. Too predictable. Rob's wife would find out eventually. Guys like Rob can't help themselves. They're not the kind of guys who get away with this stuff forever. He'd slip up again, probably sooner rather than later, and when that happened, she'd handle it herself. I started the car and drove. No destination, really. Just needed to clear my head. About half an hour later, I found myself parked in front of a familiar bar. The kind of place you go when you're not in the mood to run into anyone you know. Dim lights, a few locals nursing their beers in solitude, and a bartender who didn't ask questions. Perfect. I walked in, sat down at the bar, and ordered a drink. Bourbon, neat. Something about tonight called for something strong. I wasn't trying to drown my sorrows or anything dramatic like that. I just needed something to settle my nerves. The bartender slid the glass over without a word. I took a sip, letting the burn distract me for a moment. As I stared into the amber liquid, I thought about Linda. She didn't know about tonight, about what had just gone down with Rachel. I hadn't told her about the affair. Mostly because it wasn't her problem. She didn't deserve to get tangled up in my baggage, at least not yet. I didn't even know where things with Linda were headed. But one thing was clear, it was a hell of a lot better than whatever this thing with Rachel had become. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the messages with Linda. It wasn't anything like the texts I'd found between Rachel and Rob. No lingerie shots, no sleazy innuendos. Just simple conversations. Jokes. Shared frustrations about work. The kind of stuff that felt easy. Real. And that's what made it all the more obvious how far gone things with Rachel had been. The difference between those two conversations was stark, like night and day. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that connection with someone until it was already there. But was it enough? Was I really ready to jump into something new? I wasn't sure. And maybe I didn't have to be sure. Not tonight, anyway. I sipped my bourbon, staring blankly at the bottles lined up behind the bar. The bartender kept his distance, sensing that I wasn't here for small talk. The other patrons did the same, each lost in their own worlds. It was one of those rare moments of solitude that you don't realize you need until you're in it. The quiet hum of life moving on around me, while I sat there, letting my own life reset. After a while, I pulled out my phone again, but this time, I wasn't scrolling through messages. I went to my email instead, to the draft I'd started weeks ago. My lawyer's name stared back at me, the subject line still blank. Divorce. It was such a clinical word. Such a cold, sterile way to describe the unraveling of a life you'd once built with someone. But there it was, waiting to be sent. The message itself wasn't anything dramatic. Just a few lines explaining that I was ready to move forward, that I'd be needing his services soon. I hadn't sent it yet because, at the time, I wasn't sure. Maybe some part of me had hoped Rachel would turn it around, that we'd have some breakthrough moment, that things would magically fall back into place. But tonight had made one thing clear, there was no going back. I hovered over the send button for a moment, feeling that last flicker of hesitation. It's funny, the things you think about right before making a decision like that. The memories, the what-ifs, the stupid little moments you cling to for no good reason. Like the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes, or the way she used to curl up next to me on the couch when we'd binge-watch some awful reality TV show. But all of that was gone now. Erased, replaced by lies and secrets and the ugly truth of what we both become. I hit send. The email shot off into the ether, my lawyer's inbox lighting up with my decision. I finished my drink, paid the tab, and walked out of the bar, the weight of the evening lifted just slightly from my shoulders. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of clarity. Just the simple fact that it was over. Rachel would find out soon enough. And when she did, I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces. This was her mess now.